So you convinced yourself wood chipping your entire garden was a good idea. Staring at the pile, try to figure out, now what? I'm going to give you a few tips to make sure you can do this without causing injury. Check it out. Alright, first things first, we got to make sure we have the right tool for the job. Most of you will definitely have a shovel, but considering that you got your wood chips close to free, make sure that you make the very minor investment to get the correct tool, which is going to be a bedding fork or a pitchfork. Let's see why this is the best tool. So your shovel is going to have a lot more surface area to interact with the wood chips. More surface area means more resistance. It's much more difficult to get your shovel in that pile. Pitchfork has much less surface area. It's only going to be interacting with the very tips of these tines. Much more easy to get into your pile. So, a lot of times you'll notice that your wood chips have lots of clouds and stuff. Remember, your wood chips is going to be the petri dish for your fungus. Some of these wood chips have been sitting around long enough to have fungal activity. So it's not uncommon to have tons of fungal spores coming out every time you take a load. So make sure to have some kind of respirator, face mask, something so that you are not inhaling all those fungal spores. Alright, so we have our correct tool. Now we need to know how to attack this pile to have the most efficiency and least resistance. When you're going for your pile, your first inclination would probably go from the very bottom and then pick up. But if you'll notice, I'm having to pick up the weight of everything on top. It's way too much weight. So the way to go about this is the opposite. Don't go from the bottom, start at the top. You just want to scrape just enough to fill your fork, but not so much that you have to lift tons of weight. So it's much easier to scrape off the top than it is to try to lift from the bottom. So we've got the right tool, we know how to load our tool. Now we need to figure out what's the rest of our body doing. So the first thing you want to make sure you're doing is bending your knees slightly. The reason you want to bend your knees is this is going to activate your leg muscles. So when you're lifting these things, you're now using your legs instead of just your back. If you keep your legs totally straight, that means all of the weight has to be lifted by your back. That is a recipe for injury. Alright, so now that we know how to load the fork, we need to know how to move it around. The biggest potential for your injury is having to lift the weight of this and twist around to load up your wheelbarrow or wherever you're going with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to use leverage. When I get that pitchfork in, I'm not going to just pick it all up. What's going to happen is it's going to engage too many of your muscles and it's going to fatigue you very quickly. So what we're going to do is use leverage. Once I get that fork in here, I'm going to make a point of contact with my thigh. That way I can use just that fulcrum and leverage to lift. I'm not engaging my back, I'm not engaging my legs, I'm just using a fulcrum. So now that we know to use points of contact on our body to reduce the load, based on how you are oriented, you can actually use 3 different points of contact. So the first one we discussed is using that front thigh, so it has a fulcrum for leverage. Our second would be the inner thigh of our opposite leg, like that. Our third one is going to be our hip. We want to try to avoid any twisting motions because that's how we can hurt our back. So if you can't use the thigh based on where you're arranged in the pile, you could step in and use your hip for your load. Alright, so to recap these tips, make sure you're using the right tool. Make sure you're bending your knees so you're not using just your back. Scrape from the top, using a pivot point or fulcrum to add leverage, and then... So now we have these tips, you should be able to move your wood chips quickly and without injury. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one.